Now, the International Monetary Fund has revised the global economic growth forecast higher, with COVID-19 vaccine rollouts spurring economic activity. However, it says growth will vary from country to country depending on the medical interventions, including the efficiency of COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Now, to expand on this, we're joined by Max Alier, the newly appointed IMF resident representative in South Africa. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. Let's talk about the major outcomes of the IMF World Economic Outlook, starting perhaps with the global economy. The vaccines have become a central part of economic recovery and growth for 2021.
Hello, good afternoon. Actually, yes, we released yesterday the update to the World Economic Outlook. I think there's some good news on that. We have revised our estimate for the output decline last year. That is based on the data that we have, preliminary data we have on development in the third and fourth quarter of last year. We have now revised the contraction for the world economy last year to minus 3.5% compared to 4.3% that we had before. In addition, I think the beginning of the rollout of vaccines in December, combined with some policy initiative, obviously in the United States and Japan, has led us to revise upward our projections for 2021. We are now projecting the world economy to grow by 5.5% this year. Before we had 5.2. So it's an upgrade. It's good news. But one of the key messages in our estimates is that the recovery will be uneven across countries. The global economy looks better, but how countries will recover will depend on the specific circumstances.
With the global economy looking better, the projected growth recovery this year, of course, follows a very severe collapse of the year 2020. Take us through the projections, starting with the global picture, sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa specifically.
Well, as I was mentioning, in the case of the global economy, two reasons are important. One, as I said, one is the better performance at the second half of last year give us some optimism about the dynamics. Furthermore, the rollout of the vaccines in some countries also improved the global outlook. In the case of South Africa, we revised our growth projection for this year, for 2021, from 3% to 2.8%. This reflects partly, the second wave of the COVID pandemic. Also, there are concerns on our part that what will be the evolution throughout the year. As we have seen in the Northern Hemispheres, especially in the US and Europe, there was a new wave in the winter. So there's some question on how will the pandemic behave in the southern winter. So that's one concern. The other one is South Africa has still not started rolling out the vaccine. So there's a little bit of uncertainty exactly when it will start and the pace at which it will be rolled out. So that led us to revise our projections to 2.8%. But I must say that these days with the pandemic, making projections has become more difficult than ever.
The IMF also says it expects South Africa's GDP to contract by 7.5% last year and has now lowered the country's growth prospects in 2021 from 3% to 2.8%. Why have you revised the forecast downward for South Africa? I mean, you've mentioned some really key factors, speaking to questions on the rollout of the vaccine being one of pressing concern.
Absolutely. I think the issues I was mentioning is South Africa still has not started to roll out the vaccine. That's an important element. And there's some uncertainty exactly on when that process will start, and not only when it will start, but also the speed at which the vaccines will become available. That's one element. Second, also, as I was mentioning, is how the epidemic had behaved in the Northern Hemisphere during the winter. It's a cause of concern. We don't know how the southern winter will play out in South Africa and, well, in general, in all the Southern Hemisphere economies.
The IMF team met with the National Treasury this week. According to the Director General of the Finance Department, what discussions took place, and did South Africa ask for a loan in those discussions?
No, first of all, there are no discussion of any loans with South Africa, any additional loans at the moment. This visit, or this, what we call the IMF missions, is part of our regular dialogue with the South African authorities. As you know, all member countries of the IMF, from the US and China to Timor, East Timor, I mean, every country that is a member of the IMF needs to hold an annual consultation with the IMF. That's what is called the Article 4 consultation. That happens once a year. Now, with some economies, some big economies, important economies, systemic economies, we have a regular dialogue. And in between these major consultations, we usually have a visit that helps us update our projections and understand how the economy is performing. So we have had this, what we call a staff visit for many, many years with South Africa. So this is, as I said, in the context of our regular surveillance. There have been no discussions whatsoever in regards of additional or further financial support to South Africa.
The IMF has emphasized that policy actions by the different governments around the world must respond and ensure some sort of effective support until there is recovery. What policy action would the IMF like to see?
Well, first and foremost, and I think in this respect, the government of South Africa is rightly focused. A priority should be given to provide the needed resources for the vaccine and rolling out the vaccine. As we understand, that's a priority of the government, and we welcome that priority. In addition, the South African authorities last year rolled out important measures, both fiscal and monetary measures, to support the economy. I think they were timely, and they actually helped mitigate the impact of the crisis. I think going forward, there is some room to have measures to support the economy, but this needs to be done on a fiscally responsible way. You see, all our recommendations for the global economy, or for all the economies in the world at large, I mean, it's a recommendation for the whole. However, for every specific country, it's very important to take into consideration the specific conditions. South Africa's fiscal position had been deteriorated over the years, even before the pandemic. This year, for obvious reasons, I mean 2020, for obvious reasons, the fiscal situation deteriorated further. So while we think it's important in the short term to direct resources to the vaccine, to maintain some of the support of the economy in a fiscally responsible way, it's also important not to lose sight of the fiscal challenges that South Africa were facing already before the pandemic, and of course they are still there.
Absolutely. In about a month's time, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni will deliver the budget speech for South Africa. If you had a chance to perhaps highlight some issues that he must address during that speech, what would you specifically point at?
Well, as I said, I think it is very important. I'm not privy. I don't have information, detailed information on what the minister is going, or the contents of the budget. But our messages remain consistent. They have always been there. One is South Africa is facing important fiscal challenges. And these fiscal challenges, we do believe it's important for South Africa to, maintain the wage bill under control. If you look at the deterioration of the public finances over the last few years, one of the main drivers have been the rapid growth of the wage bill. So this is obviously an area that is a priority for the government to address the fiscal situation. Second, we believe it's very important to look at the subsidies that are provided and make sure that the subsidies that are provided are well targeted. You see, the gold governments in the world provide subsidies. What is important is that these subsidies are well targeted and are achieving its function. And perhaps more importantly, it is very important that the government reins on the transfers to state-owned enterprises. I mean, there are many state-owned enterprises that suffer from important inefficiencies, and therefore it is important that reforms are taken on that front so that these public enterprises, first of all, are not a burden on the budget, but also they don't hinder economic growth. I think in our view, fiscal consolidation is important, but it's also equally important, or perhaps even more important, to address the structural weaknesses in the economy that have kept growth in South Africa low for a number of years.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to have to leave it there for now. Max Alias, the IMF's SA County Head, giving us some sound advice and detailing the impact of the country and the contents, pardon me, on the IMF Economic Outlook, the 2021 report.